This session is 75 minutes and it will be recorded, and that will be available on the Patton YouTube channel in the near future. Any handouts that Francine has or that other presenters have had would be housed on Schoology under the folder for the date of the presentation. The chat feature is off for, the chat feature is on, so you'll be able to chat chat us with your questions or comments, and Francine and I are going to monitor that. And then we would ask that you keep your videos off and mute yourselves just to avoid distractions. Well, let's just move right into it then. Welcome to the session on how to leverage secondary EL's life experiences to address their literacy needs in Tier 1. Francine Dutrisac is a patent educational consultant and serves as the state lead for English learners. She has more than 25 years of experience in the ESL field. She has served as a preschool teacher, K through 12 ESL teacher, ESL coach, adult ESL teacher, parent educator, assessment coordinator, and Title III program coordinator. She has also worked as an ESL technical assistance facilitator on behalf of the Pennsylvania Department of Education. She has been employed as an adjunct professor for Shippensburg University, where she has taught several of the ESL program specialist certificate course requirements. She holds 2 master's degrees, a master's in library science and a master's in curriculum and instruction. Her master's thesis focuses on the adjustment of migrant children in schools. She currently volunteers to teach entry-level adult ESL to recent immigrants in her community and tutors candidates preparing for the naturalization process on a one-to-one basis. Okay, Francine, over to you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure for me to be with you to address leveraging secondary English learners' life experiences to address their literacy needs. To be sure, I wanted to address the Patton's mission is to support the efforts and initiatives of the Bureau of Special Education and to build the capacity of local educational agencies to serve students who receive special education services. And it's about PDE's commitment to least restrictive environment. The goal for each child is to ensure that the IEP teams begin with the general education setting with the use of supplementary aids and services before considering a more restrictive environment. Our learning intentions for today is touch briefly on the Scarborough Rope as it relates to the English language development principles, identify the role of social interaction in language and literacy development, and explore student interactions focusing on quality student interactions. To kind of provide the context, first of all, if you would be so kind, I would like to know how many of you are have attended the first session at the concurrent session 1. Because that will, like the context is a repeat from the first one. And if I have many of you that have already been through session 1, I will gloss over it. So if you could go in the chat and tell me yes or no, you were, no, did not attend. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 11, 12, 13, 14, okay, 15, 16. It's more no than yes, so I'll try and give, and also that I want to make sure that I address, that I don't spend as much time as I did on the first part like I did in the first session. So the bottom line for skilled reading, if you think of the simple view of reading, it includes both decoding times language comprehension in order to be equal to reading comprehension or what a skilled reader needs to make meaning of text. And for English learners, they will learn to decode, but they are not going to be skilled reader because for a long time, because they're missing the language comprehension piece. So this session is addressing the importance, especially at the secondary level, to allow students to interact with others so that ideas are acquired and eventually owned by the learner. This whole process is likened to an apprenticeship where the teacher creates activities where he or she invites students to engage with other students, provides models for them of how to interact with each other, teach them the behaviors they need to be co-constructing knowledge, and provide them with the supports to practice so that those practices become their own. At the center of those social interactions is language. Language is the means by which learners are able to co-construct knowledge, like I said in the previous slide. It's negotiating for understanding. You have a piece, you have an idea, I have another idea. As I'm sharing, we are co-constructing our knowledge. I appropriate some of what you said, you appropriate some of what I said, and that is how we are more than the sum of our parts. Language, it's important that it takes a disciplinary focus so that they are using the discourse necessary to communicate their opinions, their ideas, and that they start sounding like the scholars of that discipline. To support language development, teachers must create rich and stimulating activities so that within that interaction, we can foster conceptual, analytical, and language that practices that are central to the content. This is from a sociocultural perspective, that the development of second language practices is at its heart negotiated interaction. On the one hand, among persons within an environment, and another between these persons in that environment. Students across all grade levels are asked to do way more than they used to. They have to engage critically with text that is increasingly more complex. They have to show evidence to support their opinions or their conclusions. They need to evaluate validity of information, being able to determine if it's a true statement, supported evidence, and make the difference between arguments and counter arguments. Be able to express their ideas not only orally but in writing. And finally, one that is central to our conversation is learning to work collaboratively with their peers. College and career readiness focuses on students getting a greater understanding of content, not only greater but deeper, engaging in complex and analytic thinking about the context, and then be able to use the discourse that's appropriate for that discipline. So the three areas of development, again, are conceptual, analytical, and linguistic, and they need to grow simultaneously. And the best way to do it is participating in social interaction. We've already said that in other words, but the college and career ready standards focus on developing those essential practices. The collaboration piece is, especially with the youngsters we have, at adolescence. They're born to be social, so providing them with opportunities to express, even in being able to express what they know in perfect language is focusing more on the meaning rather than the form will help their English grow. So what does this look like in MTSS? MTSS is a framework that it has potential of supporting English learners in being data-driven, where we're looking at English learners at Tier 1 and ensuring that what we offer them in Tier 1 literacy is evidence-based, and ensuring on the behavior side that we are focusing when we're looking at behaviors, not only on PBIS, for example, but ensuring that we also address acculturation. English learners, especially in the first levels of proficiency, and if they're new to the country, will need supports in understanding expectations, behavior expectations, but also family and community engagement, and also realize that culturally they are going through the acculturation process where they may deal with culture shock, for example. So what I said about Tier 1 is ensuring that it's appropriate and evidence-based reading program, and that the interventions have been validated with English learners in their norming process. Ensuring that, that our instruction is culturally responsive. Teachers that are culturally responsive seek information on the features of the first language, know something about the literacy levels, the native language literacy, so that you can make connections to it. And we'll talk about this further in this session. Culturally responsive teachers are also ensuring that they have an understanding of culture and making those hooks to the culture of their students, so that they have a better understanding, comprehension when it comes to content. Professional development of teachers need to focus actually through through Title III. Professional development has to be offered for all teachers concerned regarding English learners every year. Give them a greater understanding of how to teach that growing population of students in Pennsylvania. And ELD instruction has to be aligned to ELA to ensure that English learners are growing their English language development, and that it's aligned. Assessment, screening tools, and progress monitoring, as I said before, have not all been, when developed, considered English learners in the development and implementation. So many, and you go, okay, because I had that question in the previous session, you need to go to the Intensive Reading Interventions website, and there are charts there that will give you the tools that have been where they have disaggregated information about the validity and the reliability of those tools. And that would be the first place you would need to go. If you need more information, I have my email address and phone number at the end of this PowerPoint. You're welcome to reach out to me, and we can continue to have that conversation more deeply. But that's like a sidetrack to this session. So finally, teachers must be aware of the English learners' proficiency levels and ensure that they are aware that a level 1, 2, and even 3 student will not have a reading comprehension at the same compared to a native English speaker. The skills will not be the same. Interventions have to focus on incorporating English language supports, providing differentiation that is based on the linguistic load, and development of oral language. A greater understanding of language and literacy development within and across language is necessary to provide effective language and literacy instruction for English learners. So the bottom line, we may have an evidence-based program for English learners, but we need to consider their language proficiency, and we need to consider focusing more on the strand of language comprehension for English learners and be culturally responsive. So here's what I just said without the visual. The research shows from the National Literacy Panel that did a meta analysis of research on English learners and literacy, that students that are English learners that are taught the science of reading will grow their, will be able to decode, but will continue, so that piece is strong and is effective for English learners. The piece that is often missing is that by 3rd grade, 4th grade, and you're probably seeing it in high school, is that they are not comprehending text. And the piece that's missing is this piece. The strand that needs a greater focus is language comprehension. The Reading First meta-analysis of literacy studies explain that for English learners, native English speakers, to grow their literacy, you had to focus on phonics, word level, and as well as text level in order for reading comprehension to occur. For English learners, it's different. We'll see that in a little bit. So the piece that is really important when you're looking at, here it is. Okay, so for English learners, the pyramid is upside down. We have to focus more on language comprehension at the text level first, then at the same time address the decoding. But the more you provide them with oracy before reading and writing, the better it is. And other supports that you can provide for English learners is to have an understanding of contrastive analysis. What that is it focuses on the differences and similarities between the first language and English in the areas of phonology, morphology, and syntax. So here in this example, a Spanish speaker who's an English learner, at, like I'd say probably level 1 or 2, will say a student, a street, a skill, a special. Cannot pronounce the word correctly, street, skill, and special. They add the phoneme e to the beginning of the word, simply because that initial phoneme of S is not present in Spanish. There's always a ne in front of this in Spanish. So in order for that student to transfer the skill, I mean, to be able to say that without the e, it will take some practice. Wanted to share with you a tool that I found that is, I guess that's when you know you're dealing with somebody that comes from a a library science background. It's what this, actually you have it in the folder that is on Schoology. I provided it for you because it is so good. Those pages, I just did screenshots of it, are showing the sound transfer, the phonics transfers that are from the first language to English. And it focuses only on 6 languages. Some of you may have more than those 6 languages represented in your classroom. So just wait a second, I'll tell you what to do with those students that are not addressed in this tool. But what it tells you is that if I have that sound in my first language, it'll be very easy phonemically for me to distinguish that sound. But if you have English learners that do not have that sound in their first language, like V, I teach adults on Wednesday nights, and for Hispanics, V, where your teeth are going into your lower lip to express it, is not an easy task. I've taught that same group for nearly a year, and I still have students that are saying B instead of V. So use mirrors, because if they can't hear it, they're not able to pronounce it and won't be able to read it. So those are things that you need to keep in mind. The 6 languages, in case you can't read the screenshots, are Spanish, Cantonese, Vietnamese, Haitian Creole, Hmong, and Korean. And they compare those L1 languages, native languages, to English. If you have students that are not represented by those 6 languages, I would recommend you do an internet search on contrastive analysis and the specific language of those students. There are lots of things available online, but if you have a language that's spoken by a very small group of people around the world, obviously you will not be able to find much on the web. But what I would recommend you do is, when you're dealing with students that are not able to read the word, read that letter, to go back and find out if they can even give them 2 sounds that are close to it and see if they're able to differentiate between the 2 of them. If they can't hear it, they won't be able to pronounce it. So is it receptive or productive? There's also phonic transfers charts that are provided here. And so again, if they're not accustomed to, if they're not able to have the auditory acuity to hear the sounds, they're going to have difficulty pronouncing them. So if these students are not accustomed to even positioning their mouth, like the V, in a way that the sound requires, they're obviously not going to be able to produce the sound. There's also charts about the grammar transfers. There are things that English learners are going to, that will interfere from their native language when they're speaking or writing in English. In Spanish, for example, English learners typically will say the house green instead of the greenhouse. Often will not pronounce final S's, because in their first language they don't, as in French. So when you're looking at grammar, highlight the transferable skills, because that's a learning hook from their first language to English. Often they will not English learners don't necessarily make that connection to their first language. We literally have to bring it, draw their attention to that. For those skills that are not transferable, we will need to pre-teach them and provide more support. And finally, and provide more practice in small group time to focus on articulation and work on minimal contrast activities like vase and base and so on and so forth. And finally, students are going to need more additional practice in order for them to appropriate that concept. Are there any questions, Jen, before I ask them to do a chat talk?
Yes, there is one. Should students that have been in the country for more than 3 years, currently in 4th grade, and has been placed in my Tier 3 reading group, truly be in a Tier 3 intensive?
Oh, that is a loaded question. So let me go back quickly to so what I would recommend you do is, first of all, is your Tier 3 intervention effective? Are you seeing progress? Are you seeing your English learner growing? But the bottom line is it really where you, when I'm asked to go into schools, because I am asked to do that, but not under my patent hat, but in my previous hat as an IU employee, I would be asked to go in a school to determine if the student, I used to call them head scratchers, where you're going, I don't know what's going on, but what we're doing is not working. And we don't know exactly what to do. And that's why we're reaching out to you. So I would go in the school and I would shadow a student throughout their day. And more than, like, I think I probably can count the students that really did need a referral for special education evaluation. Because what happens is the Tier 1 is usually at fault. It's where what's being offered is not evidence-based, or it's not culturally responsive, or there's been a lot of mobility in that student's life, like the sociocultural pieces are not being examined. The student, for example, is what we call now transnationals, has been going back and forth between their country of origin and the US. They've missed big pieces of instruction, or they were here for kindergarten to 4th grade, returned to country of origin for 3 years, coming back, they're still an English learner. Are you following where I'm going? So if you're doing Tier 3, you have to ensure, if you are going to implement an effective MTSS model to ensure that your Tier 1 instruction is addressing the needs of all students, English learners included. If you have, and I'm getting way deep here, but I will just say, reach out to me if you have more questions, and we can address it in a separate conversation, because I do want to address the focus of this session, which is on increasing oral development for English learners. So would anyone want, please, everybody, if you could go back to the chat and talk with me. What is one thing you heard so far that you plan to share with a colleague? Anybody? All right, thank you. Somebody shared, and that's a big piece. Part of that, it also, escape here, hold on here. when we talked about this, the socio-cultural piece of like the ecological piece is very important to consider. So for example, if you have an English learner that comes from a language-rich environment, that comes in high school, that is already literate in his first language, has had a good education in their first language with no disruption, these students are going to fly. They're going to be functioning and doing well in school because those English learners in middle school and high school have the labels in their first language to the concepts that you're teaching, and they're only needing the labels in English in order for them to progress. Versus a student that had interrupted formal education, that had gaps in their education, that went to school in their country of origin when it was sunny. Are you following me? So yes, I thank you for whoever shared that in the chat. Some kids will fly and some will not. So it's really important to have like if your tier 1 is not working, go look into what is that student bringing to learning, and ensure that your tier 1 is going to help. Otherwise, you may need to add more at the tier 2 interventions to catch them up. What did I do that for? Okay. So we're back to the strands, and the second part of this session will address how do we ensure that English learners have the language comprehension skills in order to become skilled reading. And I want to propose to you that much of it is in building their oracy, the ability to talk about it, to exchange with others, will grow that oral language development that will then be able to be applied to whatever they're reading. So just quickly, in not so much at the high school, well, yes, in middle school and high school, the importance of moving from simplifying language to amplifying it, provide more supports, give different entry points to the content by providing a short video, not a whole hour, probably no more than 2 minutes, that address the language that will be in the text. Provide tons of opportunities for group work. I don't know if you've noticed that in a large group, English learners tend to be quiet. If we want them to talk, they're more likely to talk to a peer in a small group than they are in large group. Provide sensory, graphic, and interactive supports. And I've pulled this out of our WIDA standards. And obviously it's not limited to that. There's actually nothing that talks about technology here, but technology should support English learners as much as possible. And the bottom line, English learners, especially at the high school, are going to need a lot of constructive feedback, showing them that you see that they're growing. Especially at the high school, it seems like an overwhelming task for a lot of our students if they arrive in middle school and above. At the effective piece, it's much harder to be, if you remember your own experience with foreign language, it's harder to, just because of adolescence, to be speaking in a language that you know you've not mastered at the middle school and high school. So every attempt that they do use their language, their English language, should be supported with constructive feedback. So in that strand that we've, language comprehension strand, we also need to focus on background knowledge. And background knowledge, as it states here, applies to all the information that we've stored in long-term memory that's direct or indirect life experiences. As I'm addressing those 5 pieces, I would like you to hold off responding to the chat talk until I'm done explaining. But in your opinion, which of these building background knowledge strategies or building world knowledge strategies has the highest yielding, is the highest yielding for English learners? So for English learners, it's important to realize that they're not bringing the same background knowledge to a text than native speakers of English born in the US. So in middle school and high school, you're dealing with students that never heard about civil rights, for example, US civil rights. So if you're talking about Rosa Parks or the Jim Crow laws or anything of that nature, you're going to have to ensure that they have the background knowledge needed to in relation to whatever theme is addressed. Do they have the cultural background addressed in the story? The other piece is that often text is written, the author writes with an audience in mind, and it's usually an audience that looks like him or her. So the importance of ensuring that the English learners in your classroom have an understanding of what that is. And finally, think about what activities can be incorporated to develop the background knowledge to provide ELs the opportunity to comprehend the text. So of all those 5 strategies, which one has the highest yield for English learners? Can you put that in the chat for me, please? Those of you who said personal experiences or 2 are actually correct. For English learners, that's the difference from a native speaker, is you have to make it, it's making it relevant to them. What's in it for me? Why am I learning this? How does that connect to me? So for English learners, it's really important that you bring the personal experience. Later in this PowerPoint, I've added, I don't know if we're going to get to the lesson, but you will see that we are bringing the personal experience. Does not take a very long time, but that's the hook that the English learner needs to previous life experiences that will bring them, that will draw them, engage them as well. Vocabulary is, some of you said vocabulary, and actually that's a close second. They need to be practicing orally the breadth, the precision, word origins, affixes. If they are Spanish speakers, most text-based, tons of tier 2 words are cognates between English and Spanish because of the Greek and Latin origins. So, but the important piece to remind ourselves is they will not memorize, they will not appropriate those words by vocabulary list or glossary access, or even translation to their first language. So the importance of creating tasks that are meaningful for them to practice listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and the redundancy of bringing that vocabulary over and over again in order for them to appropriate those words. Obviously, English learners are going to need more opportunities to use the new vocabulary in context to appropriate these words than would native speakers. Language structures are the bread and butter of ESL teachers. This is where we spend a lot of our time focusing on our teaching. I want to suggest to you that we transition from sentence stems to formulaic expressions, where we're focusing on providing expressions that are more, can be generalized over across content areas, rather than specific sentence stems that would say, Rosa Park, blank, 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 compared to blank. Make them more general, like blank compared to blank is, so that they're more sentence paragraph structures, rather than just sentence stems that are applicable only to whatever I'm teaching. The other place I wanted to remind ourselves is that social registers, not only English learners, right, don't have the register for school, but ensuring that English learners are accessing the best model of rich English is going to help them develop their language. Verbal reasoning first of all, this is when you're thinking of comprehending text. The English learners are not only, like in high school, most native speakers are not at the word level, they're at the text level. But for English learners, some of them will still be at the word level. So providing them with opportunities to hear a peer read the text will provide the oral language and the brain real estate to focus on making meaning that is necessary for them to present point of view, discuss, compare, contrast, etc. So the more we provide them with opportunities to practice their oracy, the more they will be able to transfer those skills to reading and writing. I'm not going to do a chat talk here, but I wanted to address the importance of knowing your students' first language literacy development. For the person who said that their L developed reading skills within 1 or 2 years, that tells me that that student had high literacy levels in his or her first language and was able to transfer those skills easily in English. Just like we've heard throughout this conference, some kids do not learn it quicker than others. The struggling readers are lacking lots of skills to be skilled readers. But if you have a lot of world knowledge, these kids are going to pick up the second language. Print concepts and genres transfer a whole lot from the first language. But knowing your the literacy skills of your English learners in the first language is a big piece. You can find that information from your ESL teacher, who has to do a family interview as part of the screening process and would be able to identify for you if the English learner went to school, where the student went to school, look at report cards from the previous schools, find out from the family when you are talking with them, the family literacy practices, and so on and so forth. Oral language development is the bridge, bottom line, to academic language associated with learning in school and with the development of literacy. We've talked about this before, but for a less fluent reader, even in high school, if they're processing the task, if they're focusing on making, not on decoding rather than making meaning, or not having sufficient vocab to be able to, even after they decoded it, make any meaning, this is going to be overload. So anything we can do, that we can do to reduce the real estate in the working memory so that it focuses on comprehension, the better it is. There are several types of classroom interactions: teacher to students, teacher to plural, students to whole group, teacher to a small group or one student, and then student to student interaction. Typically, traditionally, we all know this, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but those traditional ways of teaching are reducing the number of engaged students. Like in this picture, there's only one student that has his hand up, which allows the rest of the students to not be focused. Or they may be totally engaged, they may be looking in their text for the answer, but it may also be that the teacher is going to ask that one student and move on, and the other students are off the hook. So the importance of ensuring that most kids are engaged is very important. In order to engage English learners in teacher interactions, there are some things that need to be considered. And what I would like you to do is, as I'm addressing that list, to check those that you're doing consistently, and maybe consider one that you're going to use more frequently moving forward. When English learners in large group usually are not participating for a whole bunch of reasons, and you have a few of those right here. One of them, it could be that the question the teacher asked was not clear to the student, so allowing for the teacher to repeat the question more than once, ensuring that the language used is simple, so that if you have English learners at lower levels of proficiency, they may understand the question. Ensuring that the wait time is long enough for students to participate, and one way to overcome that is to allow students to turn and talk, so that they have more time to hear the question, respond, and they have an opportunity to practice their response before they're asked to respond whole group. For native speakers of English, they are intrinsically motivated to participate in the large group. They're socially motivated to participate, but for English learners, they need intrinsic motivation. So if the topic is of interest to them, they are more likely to participate. So the importance of making hooks to their prior learning or their prior experience might be one way to connect with them. This is Lily Wong Fillmore's work, by the way. And I forgot to acknowledge my colleagues' participation in this presentation. Ana Sainz de la Peña and Paula Zucker we worked as a team to develop this session, and I forgot to mention that at the beginning. So a shout out to my colleagues. So to go back to extrinsic motivation, the ability to access students that are proficient speakers of English to support and interact with will be beneficial for English learners. And finally, it's about creating a supportive environment for all students to share, to encourage relationships between learners and proficient learners. Often at the middle school and high school, and maybe it's not the case in your environment, but English learners hang out with other English learners, and that will be helpful for them to develop English that way. So more collaboration, more empathy between native speakers or more proficient speakers and English learners would be beneficial. Focus on higher order thinking, even though, but with scaffolds. So what that means is if we're asking questions that are at the lower level of proficiency, English learners are going, doesn't she know or doesn't he know that answer? Why is he asking me right there question? So ensuring that we have not only asking higher order thinking, but having higher expectations of English learners. They may not be able to produce language, but they have more receptive language than they are able to produce. So that might be one way to encourage them to participate. Finally, cultural differences. In some cultures, the students are not to ask or answer questions. They're sitting and getting. So the teachers are the ultimate imparter of knowledge. So we need to teach them that this is not the expectations here. And finally, if you have an English learner that's a level 1 or 2, you are going to teachers need to realize that when they do respond, it will be with language that is far from perfect, and to focus more on meaning rather than form, and to allow them to do more turn and talk to practice their English before asking students to raise their hands. Question. Any question, Jen, before I ask this chat talk?
No.
Okay. When you ask a question during whole group instruction, what do you do when the English learner remains silent? And I'm going to not ask you to put it in the chat, but like to respond for yourself. And hopefully I will provide you with some suggestions on how you could help English learner respond more often during classroom talk. So, and if you ask a question and an English learner responds, and it might be one of the following: an appropriate or correct response, a partially correct response, an incorrect or inappropriate response, a response in their native language rather than in English, or no response at all. So if it's an appropriate or correct response, obviously we're going to say to praise the student for their current answer, but you should encourage them to elaborate on their response, to say a little bit more if they can. Sometimes they know more than they are able to produce, but with a little bit of nudging from the teacher, they may be able to, with feeling like they've been validated, be able to grow their response a little bit. In some cases, they are partially correct and not totally, like portion of the answer is correct. So it's acknowledging that part. And then helping them to attempt to refine their response, realizing that English learners at the secondary level have large life experiences. They have world knowledge that is different from the native speakers, and may just have perceived whatever you were asking from that lens. I know that I came here as a college student from Canada, and that happened often, that my worldview was making me come up with not the correct answer, like an approximation, but not necessarily exactly what the teacher was looking for. So finally, sometimes you have students that will get an incorrect or inappropriate response, and sometimes it's trying to dig a little, like look at what was responded and try to determine, was it content specific, or do you think it was their lack of ability to have the English necessary to respond. If it's content specific, reteaching will be needed, and it probably will be needed for more than that English learner. But if it's language, it may be asking them to show what they know, or to demonstrate what they know in a physical manner. They may just not have the language to participate, but they are wanting to participate. Finally, a response in their native language sometimes is perceived as being inappropriate, but in most cases, they are engaged with you. If they are responding in their native language, it shows to you that they're able to understand English enough to participate. The issue is you may not know what they're saying, and then in that case, it might be the importance of helping them realize that you are appreciating, you're validating the first language that they bring to learning. And you may ask one of the students around them to translate for you if that's appropriate, or put it in one of the apps to translate it for you. Finally, if it's an incorrect or, oh, I missed one, an incorrect or inappropriate, oh, we did address that, I'm sorry. Finally, no response. That sometimes no response means I have learned throughout the years that if I don't respond, the teacher moves on. Or I am new to the country, I'm a level 1 or 2, and instead of saying no response, I'll say I don't know. And it might be, again, a learned behavior, or it could be that the English learner is telling you that I don't have the English necessary for me to respond to you. So one way to keep the students to be responsible for learning is communicating the belief that all students can contribute more and maintain high expectations for student performance for everyone. And so you may wait for a few more seconds for an answer before asking the English learner, to ensure that there's enough time for that English learner to translate and come up with the right answer. Or it could be getting, once the answer is I don't know, walking closer to that student so it's one-on-one rather than from the back of the English learner in the back responding to you in the front, where you're rephrasing the question more specifically for that student. It could also be asking other students around the room for contributions and then coming back for the English learner because you've given him or her the time to process, for them to be able to contribute to the discussion. So the bottom line is when you meet English learners with a no response, you have to dig deeper to determine if it's language or if it's they're saying, I don't want to participate, and giving them options for participating. We're going to talk about productive talk formats, teacher-centered, student-centered, and so the bottom line is research is, especially at the secondary, some of you might have been trained in reading apprenticeship. It's quality student teacher, it's QTELS. Quality teaching for English learners is very much parallel to reading apprenticeship, and it's about growing oral language. And they're effective for English learners as it is for native speakers. So in quality student interactions, we need as teachers to develop opportunities for them to have sustained and reciprocal talks. So they talk back and forth, co-constructing understandings. They're engaging in disciplinary practices, but it's a back and forth. No one has the final, like there's not one answer, but it can be, it's higher order thinking, and it's open-ended, and it's maintaining academic rigor. English learners are going to need talk moves. You probably have noticed that sometimes English learners may appear rude or impolite, and often it's because they do not have the conversation gambits to know how to engage in conversations. So those are, when we talked about earlier about formulaic speech or formulaic starters, this is what I meant. They are able to be, they're generative. They would be able to be transferred to other content area. We're not going to have time to view this video, but I would like you to maybe sometime this summer look at how this teacher has made it a formative assessment for students themselves to look at how many talk moves they use during conversations, so that everybody has to play a role in those conversations. Quality student interactions, as I said before, has to be open-ended questions that allow for language-rich, robust sharing of ideas, focusing on disciplinary discourse. The more we use that language, the more we're going to help English learners use the language, the discourse, the language forms and functions, and the vocabulary of the scholars of that discipline. And obviously, because there's so much to be taught, the importance of focusing on key ideas and not sidebars as much as possible. This is the work of Walke and Van Leer, the quality student interactions. And the bottom line is that when we give voice and choice to students, especially in middle school and high school, and giving them the opportunity to determine where they're leading this conversation, that quality student interaction, we are promoting student initiative, student autonomy, where the students are engaging around concepts that are original, and they're creating novel ways to express their thoughts and opinions. I'm looking at my clock and going, I need to get moving here. But this is a list of how can I create spaces for quality student interactions in my classroom. And it's 2 slides that are giving you a list of questions that helps you determine if what you're providing are quality student interactions. And I'm not going to read them. You can read them just as much as I can. But as you move into next year, and hopefully we're going to be face-to-face, if not, this would lend itself to the Zoom. I always forget that word, Jennifer. Those sub rooms that you can create.
Oh, the breakout rooms.
Breakout rooms. Okay, so thank you. So the breakout rooms would lend itself to for those for that type of quality student interaction. And here's the second one. But for all of this, English learners have to have teachers that have created, as a classroom environment, a place where it's safe for them to participate, where there will be no ridicule for their pronunciation or their lack of proficiency in English. Everyone's contributions are valued. And if you're probably familiar with the WIDA performance definitions, there is one for listening and reading, the receptive skills, one for the productive skills, and that's where we're going to focus more because of the nature of our topic. But realize that it's so important to know where your English learners are on levels of proficiency. We often talk about differentiation, but we're looking in a UDL situation, but the only thing that we need to add to our toolkit is linguistic differentiation. We can't expect English learners to function at this level of proficiency, level 5, if they're a level 1 or 2. We're going to have to scaffold the language so that they are able to produce language as in here. So in speaking and writing at the paragraph level, they're still at the word and phrase. They're not able to write a connected paragraph at a level 1. So having them label, having them create, use language, oral language will be helpful, so on and so forth. The WIDA can do descriptor key uses is a new tool published in 2015 that have focus on the types of language that are the most used in academic and business settings. If you're not familiar with it, I would recommend that you just Google WIDA can do descriptors key uses, and it'll take you right to them. There's one for grade 6-8 and another one for 9-12. And it focuses on the language needed to recount, explain, argue, and discuss. So some of those are higher order tasks or cognitive tasks, and would be able to be used to develop those open-ended discussion questions. And so here's some formulaic phrases that we created for you, but obviously we're not going to have time to have you develop your own open-ended question, but should be used in Francine's perfect world. All middle school would be using those same formulaic phrases. All high school would be using those formulaic phrases across content. Obviously not limited to those that I've addressed here, but that repertoire could be made bigger. And for English learners, it's not hitting them with all of them at once, but ensuring that we teach one or two at a time in order for them to appropriate that learning. Word generation is focusing for those at the high school level. Obviously, you may want to dip 9th grade. You might want to use this. It's a supplement to what you're doing in tier 1, but it's called word generation. It focuses on 4 or 5 words a week, and it's across science, social studies, ELA, math, and the 5th day you're working on a writing piece. It's good for not only English learners, it's good for students that lack the academic language for success in school. And I would highly recommend it if you're dealing with ELs that are at the lower levels. There are EL supports only for series 3. There are 3 series. Series 3 would be the best place to go. I'm not going to have time to go through the lesson, but what I wanted to show you for just quickly at a glance, it's about it's usually an informational text. English learners have better comprehension with informational rather than narrative text. So the building background, we're talking about, it's about Malala. So a video, it's 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Shorter is better for English learners. Then the inside side, like to build background knowledge for English learners here. Have you ever experienced or witnessed an injustice? We're making a connection to their prior learning, their individual personal experiences. So it's here again, what can I say? Summarize what I like. a bookmark that slows them down during reading. This is a tool that you could use. And a graphic note taker where you're sharing it with each other, as in a jigsaw activity where they're responsible for one piece rather than the whole text. Provides them, again, opportunities to collaborate, to talk about, get a greater understanding. A gallery walk, a writing activity, extension activities, again, more extension activities. These are all the things that they did to build comprehension during this lesson plan. And finally, this takes me to my last chat talk. What have you found relevant to you in this session, and what do you plan on implementing in your classroom? If you could just throw a few things in the chat box, that would be very much appreciated. And I'm going to look at questions if there are any, Jenny.
Sounds good.
Are there any questions?
Don't see any questions in here. I was just looking through, you know, some comments about how kids from one family can come in with, you know, at different levels, even though they come from the same family.
Oh, that's a big piece. Actually, when I would go visit schools, I would ask, what is the family order? Where is that student in the family order? The baby of the family has more English and less of the first language, and it actually is usually detrimental for the English learner than having a better control of their first language when we're teaching the second language. Good job. Too bad this was not long enough.
I know. Well, I was just going to say, you have there are probably a lot of different questions, and people would like some more resources or links to the resources. Can I put your email address in the chat box so people can?
Sure. And actually, if you look at the one last slide before we leave. By some estimates, ELs spend less than 2% of their school day in oral interaction. Sometimes teachers or whoever, they are killing English learners by their kindness. They are not wanting to ask questions of English learners because they don't want to put them on the spot. But English learners need to use language in order to produce talk. And then the teachers need to listen carefully to the language to determine what scaffolds are needed in order for them to grow. I've given you a lot. That's the librarian in me. You have a large reference. I've highlighted 2 of them in blue. They are go-to strategies that are really helpful for English language learners, for the Center for Applied Linguistics. And the teacher toolkit from Texas in Region 13 are both fabulous tools to use in your tool belt. And I want to leave you with my email.